President Trump's proposed ban on certain funding to sanctuary cities has been blocked by a federal judge, William Orrick, who, by the way, has a long history of donating heavily to Democrats. Once credited for raising money for John Kerry's failed presidential bid and nearly $200,000 for former President Barack Obama, the judge permanently blocked the sanctuary cities order, calling it unconstitutional. So, was it politics or just justice? Here to discuss, radio host and Mediaite contributing editor Larry O'Connor and Johns Hopkins professor Wendy Osefo. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Good evening.
All right, so I want to read a little bit about what the judge said on this, because he said basically, you can't tell these people you're cutting off this money they thought they were going to get. It impacts their budgets and all kinds of things. He said, in part, while the federal government may incentivize states to adopt federal programs voluntarily, it cannot use means that are so coercive as to compel their compliance. Professor, we'll let you start.
Absolutely. So I understand what the judge is saying here, right? Because at the end of the day, he said there's no way for them to enforce this. There's no way for them to say, if this is something that you bestow upon us, we're not going to be able to say, actually, you're wrong. And that is the issue here. There are no guidelines, and that's what we're talking about. It's not about his political leanings. We can't use that as a rubric to say who can and who cannot judge on an issue.
Yeah, because a lot of judges do get involved in political campaigns and those kinds of things. The judge also said this. He said the executive order doesn't direct the attorney general or secretary to provide sanctuary jurisdictions with any notice of an unfavorable designation or impending cut to funding. He said basically they have no way to appeal this. They have no way, essentially no due process, Larry, if this money gets cut off.
I'd really welcome all of my friends who are Democrats that are now embracing federalism and the 10th Amendment and the separation of powers. Where have you been the last 6 decades? But that said, the beauty of our founding documents, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, Bill of Rights, everyone can understand them. They make logical sense, Shannon. And I think for most Americans, when you see this sanctuary city policy and you see cities and counties and states deciding, yeah, we're not going to cooperate with the federal government on this. We're going to disobey that law. We're going to pick and choose what laws are valid and which laws aren't, but still give me all those federal tax dollars. It doesn't pass the smell test with most Americans, and it doesn't make sense. And to me, this judge's ruling doesn't really wash either.
Well, no surprise, the White House didn't think so either, saying this: the flawed district court ruling undercuts the president's efforts to keep the American people safe and secure by enforcing existing law. We are confident the courts will ultimately uphold the president's lawful and necessary authority. Now, the next step would be the Ninth Circuit. I believe this was in California, so Ninth Circuit, which, not really. The Ninth Circuit does not love President Trump or any of his policies. So maybe this does end up at the Supreme Court. But how do you think they do at that level?
I think it will end up at the Supreme Court. Historically, the Ninth Circuit has been left-leaning. Again, if we look at Judge Chong or Judge Wilson, these are 2 other judges who looked at this ban and they said, you know what, we're going to push this aside. And I think it's really important here for us to understand that it's not the fault of the judges. We have to make sure we're putting forth policies that is well-written, that has checks and balances, and that's what's void here. And I honestly believe if they are able to revise this and put in some measures of checks and balances, this could actually go through, but that's what's missing right now.
The fundamental issue here is the rogue policies of cities deciding not to follow the law. And we can talk about all the constitutional aspects and all the, major issues here. Let's put a human face to this. Right here in suburban Washington, in Montgomery County, very liberal Montgomery County, Maryland, just 2 weeks ago, a young woman was murdered by a man, a co-worker at a Kentucky Fried Chicken. That man was in this country illegally. He was deported in the 90s, back when Democrats obeyed immigration laws. He came back into the country illegally. He was pulled over and stopped 2 different times by Montgomery County police for traffic infractions, but his immigration status was never investigated because of the sanctuary policy in Montgomery County, and then that man ended up murdering an innocent person. There are very real human repercussions from these policies.
There are, and I'm actually one of them. I am an immigrant. I came to this country when I was 3 years old. I'm from Nigeria. I was the first person to get a PhD in my department in 2016. So let's not paint immigrants as people who violate the law.
Legally.
Yeah, I did come here legally.
Do you not make a distinction between legal immigration and illegal immigration?
I absolutely do.
Oh, good. So then don't say I was painting immigrants that way, because I wasn't.
But Jeff Sessions doesn't, right? Because he has put forth policies that really speak to all immigrants and paint them with a broad brush.
Not this policy. This is very specific to illegal immigration. Can you name one policy he set forth that paints all immigrants as the same, legal and illegal?
Absolutely. He tries to make it seem as though all immigrants, he says it. No,
that's not a policy. He tries to make it seem as though it's not a policy.
It's not a policy, but we have empirical data that says that immigrants do not commit more crimes than United States citizens. And what you say,
illegal immigrants do. It is true because they stay in this country illegally. They're continuing to break the law.
That is not true.
This is not a technical foul, although I'm not afraid to award that. But this is time now. I will. No, we're just getting off on a little bit of a rabbit trail. But just to be clear, the sanctuary city policy we're talking about strictly deals with illegal immigration. But we can continue the conversation another time.
Oh, we'll continue it in the green room.
Professor and Larry, good to see you both.
Always good to see you.
We'll sell tickets
Happy
to that.
Thanksgiving.
And to you guys as well. All right, just ahead.